Hello class. So today I want to talk about variables in Visual Basic. Uh, we need to understand the different variables that are accessible to us and so that we can move forward with our programming. So right now I'm in Microsoft Visual Studio and you can see that I'm in the Visual Basic option, Windows Desktop. I'm going to use the console app. Now, if some of you haven't seen the console app, I do have a video that I can throw up on you. Well, I do have a YouTube video for what a console app is and explain that. But console apps are really handy for just doing examples. There's no form, it's just pure code. And so I'm going to use them whenever I do these types of examples rather than doing a Windows form. Normally we'd be up here in the Windows Forms app, but today we're going to do the console app. Okay, so I'll click console app. I already typed in variables example. That's going to be the name of this one. Go ahead and create it. So when you create the console app, this will be the first screen that pops up. We'll use the module one, and you'll see a sub main and then an end sub. So basically your subroutine is going to be right here, and we can start coding in here. So I'm gonna do this to demonstrate a few of the variables that we can use. So the first variable I want to demonstrate is an int, because that's one that we'll be using a lot. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first way, the way that you initialize a variable is to use the keyword dim. You just type it in, it pops up right away, dim. And the next thing you're going to want to do is say, okay, create the variable name. So you can name this anything you want. Right now, let's go ahead and just use the word, we'll use the letter I for integer. You'll see AS comes up right away. So yes, we're going to use this as. It's a keyword that says what type of data type are we going to use. So the data type that we're going to use, like I already said, is int. So I start typing in int, in, and you see there's already 4 options that come up. These represent different numbers of bits that can be used. So depending on the size of your int, the integer that you're going to be using, is how you would pick this. So if you're using a small number, let's say you're going to iterate through only 10, 12, 20 items, something small, then you're going to want to use a 16-bit integer. You can see it represents a 16-bit signed integer. So I'll go over a little bit the different values. For example, int16 means that your values that you could have are anywhere from a negative 32,768 through a positive 32,767. Those are your values. If you were talking about a 32, an int 32 that you see there, then the values could be anywhere, and this is 4 bytes, by the way. So an int 32 is 4 bytes. The int 16 was 2 bytes. The int 32 at 4 bytes means that you can have values anywhere from a -2 to that's actually 2,147,483,648, and then to the positive of that same amount. And I don't think I'm going to say the values again. I'll just use the numbers. For an int 64, then you're talking 8 bytes, and of course it's a much larger number. You also have differences in when you're using text, but we'll talk about text later. For right now, just know that these right here, it really depends on the value of numbers you can use. If you're using a small number, use an int 16, and if you need more, you can use more bytes and use a 32 or 64. This is important when you start considering how much memory you're going to be using and how much processing power you're going to be using. So be efficient in your uses. If you're just doing a simple loop and it's not going to go through more than a certain amount, then just use an int 16. That's typically what I use. All right, so let's go ahead and pick that, and then let's go ahead and say, okay, so now we have this int I, and we're going to just do something really simple. We're just going to set it to something. So I is going to equal, and just for our purposes, 3. No big deal. Okay, now let's output it. So let's assume that here's where you would process this integer, or you do something with it. In our case, we're just going to send it right back to the console. So the keyword is console.write, and this is going to output whatever we want it to output. In our case, we want to output the integer, so we're going to output I. And if you were to just run it like this, what will happen is it'll compile and it's going to go away instantly. So you have to do something to make it stop. So that's where the next one comes in, console.read. And then this will pause it after it runs. So we can run that again, and our console pops up, and you can see the output was 3. So again, we declared it as an int16. We declared, and then we initialize it. We say, okay, I is going to equal 3. We set it to a value. Then we output it to the console. Console write I, and then we paused the console so that we could take a look and see what our integer was. So that works nicely. Now in here's where we could process something. We could do some other work with it too. So let's go ahead and play with that a little bit. Let's create another one, and let's just say we're gonna call this one J. And again, you have to use a keyword. In Visual Basic, you have to use as your as a keyword to say what we're going to use. So let's use int16 again. And this time, let's set J is going to be equal to 4. And then just some real simple math. We're going to say, okay, 3 plus, I'm sorry, I plus J. And let's use a third variable. And we'll just use K again. And over here, we're going to say, okay, well, K is going to equal I plus J. And now this time, let's output K and see what happens. And now we can see that what was output was 7. So we declared 3 variables as int6. We initialized them to I equal 3, J equal 4, and K equals the sum of those, and then we output K. And it's really that simple. So that's what we did there. Okay, let's go ahead and stop the compiler. Now I want to talk about decimal and double. So the difference between decimal and double is that a double is 8 bytes, takes less memory, and a decimal is 16 bytes, takes a little bit more memory. Also, the double has what's called double precision. It's a floating point decimal, and so it just depends. A lot of times you're going to use a double, a lot of times you use a decimal. It just depends on the application that you're writing. But for our purposes, I guess we'll go ahead and use the decimal, and let's run some numbers through. So the first thing we're going to want to do is let's change this to decimal. And this time, let's throw something in like that. And see what happens this time. And here's our output, 7.89. So cool, that works. This is how we would handle decimals in our application. The next thing we're going to want to talk about is some text and how to handle what are known as strings. The first thing I want to talk about when it comes to the strings, and basically characters, alphanumeric characters, is let's say that you know for a fact that you only want a single letter, a single character, the letter A or B. For example, let's say you were collecting gender and you had female or male, and you were just collecting F or M. Any of those types of situations where you only want a single character. If that's the case, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to use the data type char. And this time we'll do a var as char. And we're going to set char, or var, excuse me, equal to our data type. And so let's go ahead and say, what are we going to say? We're going to say, well, M. And we need to do the double quote. And there's no K, so let's output var and run that one. And you can see that M was output. So here we have dim var as char and var equals m. Console write the var, console read. The issue with char, the reason we use char is that char is only 2 bytes. So again, if you're going to have a single character that you're outputting, you want to be conservative with the data, with the memory that we're using. So we're only using 2 bytes of memory. This is good. If we had a string that had more characters, then of course we would use something else. But I just want to point that out. If you ever have a case where you're using a single character, for example, gender, we have M or F, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other places you might want to do that, then you're going to want to use a char as your data type because of the fact that it only uses 2 bytes. Let's kill the compiler and pause. In the event that you have more characters that you have to display, you're going to want to use the data type string. So let's do that, string. And now let's say that this was actually a name. Now we have more characters to deal with. You need to use the data type string. Let's run the compiler. And the compiler outputs Mike. No problem. Let's stop the compiler. Okay, so I also want to talk about a little bit more with strings and how to manipulate them. There's a whole section that we'll be covering on this, but this is just for quick review or a short introduction. So we're back to our var string. We're going to go ahead and do like we had before. We set var equal to, let's go ahead and say Mike, and then let's create a couple more variables. Dim var as string. Of course, you can't use the same variable twice, so let's just say var2 and dim var3 as string. And down here, we're going to set var2 equal to, let's say, his last name. And var3, now this is where things are a little bit different. We're going to say, okay, we'll do var1 or var plus var2, and this time we're going to output var3 and see what happens. And we have Mike Martin all together because this is called concatenating. We concatenated the two variables, and this was our output. So we probably want to do something in the middle there, and what you can do is you can say, okay, let's do this. So we put a space in there is what we did, and now let's run that. And we have our space, Mike space Martin. So we concatenated var with a space and then with Martin. Another way to do this is to use the ampersand, and let's go ahead and do that. A lot of people prefer doing it this way because that way it's not confusing with mathematics, and we have the same result. The var concatenated with space concatenated with var2. So another data type that we often use is Boolean. Sometimes you just want to know if a condition can be one or the other. So a dichotomy where it's either 0, 1, true, false, that kind of thing. So the data type that you want to use there is called a Boolean. And so this time we're going to declare var as a Boolean. We're going to set var equal to, let's just say, false. And this time we're just going to output var and see what happens. And so it outputs to false. Obviously, if you were writing a program, you would have some type of processing in here where you're keeping track of something and you just want to set it to true or false for whatever purpose. Maybe you're flagging something, or you're looking for a certain condition. You're searching for a pattern, and when it catches the pattern, you want it to say that it's true. Something along those lines. This comes in handy all the time. So if you ever have a situation where you just need a dichotomy, 0, 1, true, false, you want to use the Boolean. Again, that's because the Boolean it's using very little memory, and so that's the option for that. So I also want to cover date time, and The data type for that is just date. And, oh, sorry, forgot the keyword as date. We're going to set var equal to, again, you have to use the parentheses, the quotations. So let's set it to today. And now let's output that. You'll see that it outputs the entire date, 1/14/2019 at 12 a.m. It's going to default to this. There are ways to get around this. We can pull out just the day, the month, the year, but there's an entire module on the date time stuff, and I'll be going over all that during that module. For right now, I just wanted to show you how you can work with date time, and that's it. So let's stop the compiler. So I went over a few of the data types and how to enter them, how to manipulate them, how to output them. We're going to go ahead and practice using some of these data types because these are the data types that I went over are the primary ones that we'll be using in this class. There are other ones that we can use, and I might discuss a few more, but for right now, for us to help us learn the programming principles that I want to get through to you guys, we're going to be using the ones that I just went over.